Okay, I think we should just start. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming out today. It's not such a beautiful day. I guess it's raining, but thank you all for being here. We're very excited for this panel today, Storytelling and the Lives of Objects. We have a number of esteemed guests here and panelists from Windsor and across Canada and also the US. So I will pass the mic on to our moderator, Jessica Cook. You will find a handout which has detailed bios of each of our panelists. Please take your time to read through, and over to Jessica.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would just like to say, first of all, how incredibly honored I am actually to be sitting amongst such amazing and inspirational group of folks. As a trained artist, I guess you'd say, from the University of Windsor at the LaVallee School of Visual Arts, I actually grew up researching and admiring the works of our guests here today, especially obviously the professional Native Indian artists incorporated movement, if you will. Obviously, their role in breaking the barriers for future artists, First Nation artists like myself, was obviously groundbreaking, and they're trailblazers and really set the way for a lot of us, and contemporary artwork for folks like me who are First Nation artists as well, but also conceptual, sculptural artists who also in their own right had to fight over time to get their work seen in art galleries as well. What I thought was absolutely beautiful about this exhibition and thought-provoking was the juxtaposition of the different works of art. Primarily, I thought it was really interesting. Did everybody get a chance to walk around the second floor? Wonderful. If you didn't, get a chance obviously after this, and particularly when I'm speaking about to find a common thread amongst all the artworks. I thought it was very interesting how our two-dimensional paintings are a collage of objects, events, and emotions that each artist endured or went through their life. And each artwork, each piece depicts a different story. And it's interesting how Raphaëlle's work, being sculptural, conceptual, and gathered and borrowed and donated objects, also tell a story. And it's interesting how each object does carry its own story and voice of events. And I found it fascinating to see Daphne Ojig's painting, Conflict Between Good and Evil, next to Raphaëlle's work directly beside it. And I took a picture of it, and it was just, you couldn't tell the difference if you actually zoomed in and focused on Daphne's painting and Raphaëlle's painting, to see close up the comparison of the two. You can see the common bond that this type of artwork has together when they're presented together. So anyways, I thought that was fascinating. And also, Alex has a painting called Eagle and Insects, and he said, there's a little note next to his, that the eagle, a large flying bird, and the very small insect both live in the same world, yet for a different reason, and both affect nature, which I found fascinating too when we compare Western ideologies and First Nation ideologies, and the way we both interpret and depict our artwork are completely different. And interestingly enough, we both do affect nature differently. And I thought that was a very thought-provoking and very, very deep thought. Anyways, so I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and she can tell us a little bit more about her exhibition, and it's just wonderful, and I thank you so much, Michelle. It's just amazing to have the opportunity to be here with you today. So thank you.
Good afternoon, Ani, Bonjour, Kiwait and Quain Indishnakas. My name is Michelle LaVallee, and I'm the Associate Curator at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina, and the facilitator of the exhibition downstairs, 7 Professional Native Indian Artists Incorporated. First, I think it's good and important that we acknowledge the original caretakers of this area, the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, and truly recognize the legacy of First Nations peoples in this territory. I also wanted to thank the Art Gallery of Windsor for hosting the exhibition and for inviting us all here. Thank you to Catherine Maston and all the staff here at the gallery. I know how hard it is to put these shows up and down, especially dealing with crazy curators who's not even here for the install. So I really appreciate the hard work of the staff here. The exhibition looks great, so truly thank you. I'm extremely happy that these 2 gentlemen traveled here to be with us today, Alex and Joseph. And what a pleasure it is to meet Raphaëlle and Russell and Robert. So I'm looking forward to hearing you talk as well. And of course, thank you all for being here today. It is with great respect and pride that I undertook the development of the Exhibition 7, and in looking forward, I recognize there is a need to look back and honor those who came before me, whose great commitment and efforts literally enabled the possibility of me being in a position to facilitate a project of this scale. And the 7 artists of the Professional Native Indian Artists Incorporated are part of this legacy. So in thinking about the theme of today's panel, storytelling in the lives of objects, I think there's a few ways you can really relate the exhibition, the artworks, and the artists to this conversation. I was thinking of artist as storyteller, curator as storyteller, and how artworks can embody story with signs, traces of meaning, stories that reach beyond the present, both backwards and forwards. I was also thinking of art objects and their function as living objects, as living stories, and the relationship of art to memory. So the artworks in 7, they embody not just story, but are part of a legacy, really. They carry many stories with them, some from the distant past, some from not so long ago, many relevant to the present, and definitely important for the future. The spirit of each individual maker and their experiences, their shared history, is what travels with these objects, and then is added to by each individual viewer. And that's important to remember. Perhaps we can think about the exhibition like a bundle, a medicine bundle, a bundle for our communities. It contains items that we need to respect, love, support, care for. They are beautiful reminders, but they're also teachers. So thinking about storytelling, this really was a large connector for me when I was researching and selecting works for the exhibition. As an overarching theme, the concept of narrative, sending messages, telling stories, documenting histories, or relating everyday experiences, that really does permeate the both exhibitions. The artist is storyteller, adventures are recounted, conflicts are described, and experiences with government and church are recorded. Stories are reanimated through their work and linked to the experiences of individuals and histories of communities. Now, perhaps the most common kind of storytelling occurs at the kitchen table or in the living room, around a fire, or at a coffee shop. And when we gather with family and friends, this personal type of storytelling really enriches our interactions and maintains connections with one another. These stories can be humorous, emotional, dramatic, or mundane, but everyone has a story to be told, whether tales of adventure, memories from youth, or moments with close friends. And there are historical precedents for this type of narrative. In most First Nations cultures, pictographs were used not only for sacred or spiritual purposes, but also just to leave messages, tell stories, and document everyday experiences. So the subject matter explored by these 7 artists from the PNIAI is quite diverse, with content that is anecdotal, humorous, spiritual, and political. Some of the work is very personal in nature, most of it in fact, and it is based on biographical narratives, references dreams or visions, or relates everyday stories from their individual lives. Other works take on social issues related to history, government, and ecology. And still, other works turn to legends and the supernatural for inspiration, to articulate spiritual beliefs, and to understand dualities and conflict. It's through storytelling that we are offered a glimpse into the experiences of these 7 artists. So as we know, Indigenous cultural traditions have a long and continuous history in North America, and the members of this group sought to reconnect with these traditions through the myths and narratives of their various nations. These distinctly non-Western stories instruct us how to act in the world and interact with the myriad of beings around us. The stories provide moral lessons about life in this land, and the narrative legends that are presented or represented are not appropriations of the sacred, but a powerful reclaiming of an ancient form of storytelling, visual storytelling, created by previous generations. And these artists frequently drew on the legacy of their ancestors for inspiration, and in doing so, what they did was visually translate a world of knowledge based on oral tradition, individual experience, and cultural heritage. And while the intention behind the artwork varies from artist to artist, each member developed their iconography to build upon this cultural inheritance. Because as we know, regardless of background, each generation of artists adjusts to the information that precedes it, brings new ideas into the discussion, and responds to the current political milieu. So in the 1970s, even before then, 50s, 60s, 70s, the objectives of the group were based on a shared concern with Indigenous philosophies, worldviews, and aesthetics. While interpretations are individually subjective and sometimes specific to their individual nation, the work produced was unquestionably non-European, and the forms, styles, and techniques that varied among the members, the aesthetic conventions, were all truly innovative, and it really was an extension of an oral tradition via visual art. But we also have to remember that art is not a substitute or a replacement for oral storytelling, but another means to describe and explain the reality. As Alex has often said, this is his way of speaking to the public, his visual language to convey what's inside his spirit. I don't like speaking for you when you're right beside me. So together, when I look at the artworks in Seven, they also tell a story that was long overlooked. I was thinking about Raphaëlle's work, and in a few instances I've seen it described as discarded objects. Now when I heard that term, I kind of see this exhibition, Seven, as giving attention to objects that were in a way discarded. At one time, their value or significance was questioned, particularly in a contemporary mainstream context. They were not deemed worthy of the recognition they so rightly deserved. But I'm happy that's no longer the case, or at least I hope we're at a point where that's no longer a necessary argument. So the exhibition, Seven Professional Native Indian Artists, Inc., it's not a retrospective exhibition, a simple look back, but rather a retroactive exhibition. It is what could have happened and should have happened 40 years ago. So the exhibition and the publication acknowledge the joy and inspiration that this group has brought and continues to bring to so many people. Their coordinated efforts and the deep feeling manifest in their art are the reasons for the exhibition. For those of you who are not familiar, one of Canada's most important artist alliances was the Professional Native Indian Artists, Inc. They made history by demanding recognition for its members as professional contemporary artists. In the words of Alex, again, they set out to change the world, the art world for natives of Canada, and they did that. Gathering informally in the early 1970s, the group pushed for the recognition of contemporary First Nations art at a time when Indigenous artists were routinely invalidated, marginalized, and excluded by the dominant art world. By challenging old constructs and stimulating a new way of thinking about the lives and art of First Nations people, they signaled a new course for the exhibition and reception of Indigenous art. And by the end of 1972, this group of seven, Jackson Beardy, Eddie Kobinis, Alex Janvier, Norval Morso, Daphne Ojig, Carl Ray, and Joseph Sanchez, constituted the first self-organized, formally autonomous First Nations artist advocacy collective in Canada. So it takes courage to make work that differs from those before you and not assimilate into the mainstream art world. The visual impact of the works will hopefully reacquaint viewers with the excitement and newness of the images and styles which these seven artists produced, an excitement shared by many artists who have built on their artistic innovations. The exhibition considers their collective artistic impact as well as the distinctive styles and experimentation of the individual artists. So going back to storytelling, if I digressed. 7 also tells a story of strength and unity, the larger and growing social and cultural movement to see Indigenous voices heard and to ensure a continuation of cultural practices is evident in the work of these artists. PNIAI members were interested in expanding their horizons as artists rather than succumbing to a prepackaged, narrow definition of Indian art and double standards around authenticity. Where one voice had limits to what it could say, several artist voices combined create a richly diverse and powerful statement. These individuals and their contemporaries showed the world that Indian artists can and will make work on their own terms, and we continue to do so. Their efforts have influenced individual practices and collective strategies nationally. Theirs is one of the key histories that signaled a new course for the exhibition and reception of contemporary Indigenous art. So 7 is a story. 7 provides a glimpse at a vision that flourished despite the struggles these artists face within the repressive social, political, and cultural contexts of Canadian mainstream society. Complex worlds beyond our own are revealed in individual impressions of a variety of subjects. But while few paintings portray a complete narrative, whether literal or symbolic, their statements always engage larger concerns with culture and humanity. They're richly layered with meaning and emotion. The artworks capture a perception of the world that encourages reflection. They record moments from our shared histories for contemplation and remembrance. Their works provide a window upon this collective vision, encouraging us to think about the forces that shape our lives and how we want to shape our future together. Importantly, these objects, the artworks, reveal the presence of living, creative sources firmly rooted in the multicultural world of today and open the way to a more understanding world of tomorrow. It is this history, this story, these stories that live and travel with these artworks, these objects. It has been an honor and a privilege. Chief McQuitch.
Thank you, Michelle. I would just like to say, yesterday I had the opportunity to come and meet Michelle and Alex and Joseph, and I didn't get a chance to meet Bob or Raphaëlle. But I just wanted to say it is so truly emotional, and I'm right there with Michelle. It's actually, it was just so surreal, really. And I just want to stress the importance of how truly amazing the work these folks have done as well. And I don't want to get all emotional with you, Michelle, but I just want folks to know how truly important it is to have these guys here. And without further ado, obviously, I'd like to introduce Alex and just say what an honor it was to be able to share some stories with them last night.
I'm sorry, yeah. See, I'm just beside myself with
Got
just...
your attention. Good afternoon. I am Alex Janvier.
Thank you.
I am the artist that was involved in the art world. I came to change the picture of the world of Canadian art. And I'm educated. I went to your schools and I passed everything that was thrown at me, and the reason why I got educated is you wouldn't believe it. I was a smart little boy, so I was brought up in the Catholic system, and I got to go to high school and so on. And as soon as I finished my grade 12, I had a bunch of priests come at me just like car salesmen. They were trying to get me into their order. And I didn't realize that's why I was getting educated, for that reason. And anyway, I went in, and I lasted with a Roman collar, long dress and all that, and bravery and praying every day for 4 months. And then I was asked if what I really wanted to be. Well, I was quite quick about that. I said I want to be an artist and then a priest. And the man looked at me, he was a small little priest, an icky little guy, you know. But he had a cross on himself, you know, so you couldn't really slap him around, you know. But anyway, he looked at me, and these are the words he used on me after a long while. And we're both waiting for his statement, you know. He said, "You can't serve two masters." Well, in that case, get me the hell out of here. So he got me the hell out of there. I was gone the next day on the train from Winnipeg to Edmonton. And from that moment on, I decided to devote my life to the work of art. But when I entered into it, nobody wanted to say you're an Indian and you're painting. What's the matter with you? You know? I said the Indians have painted their shields and their tents and everything, and they've used fine art in their regalia. You know, these beadwork, porcupine quill work. I have observed all of that when I was a little kid. And these old ladies made sure that we sat around them and you couldn't move, you know. Even if you wanted to go and pee, you know, you had to, you know, make sure, you know, that you didn't offend anybody. Anyway, that's the story to begin with. My life as an artist beginner, you know, we used to clear, you know, after a rain, the ground is just nice and smooth. And I'd get a stick and I'd draw things on the natural slate, you know, for the even leveled dirt. And one day I was on a farm, so I used to observe the mating of the horse and the bull and the pig and all that. And one day I decided to draw this thing. The old stud was pretty active that time, and I thought I would do that, you know, draw it on it. Of course, my sister had to take exception to that, and she went and tattled-taled on me, and my mother sent my dad to go and see what Alec had been doing. And he shook his head and he smiled, and he went back to my mom. And the words that he used, I don't think that horse is going to make it. I guess my drawing was way off key. You know? Anyway, that's part of the beginning of the innocence of starting to work. I did go to an art school. I was privately tutored by a German immigrant who was teaching at the University of Alberta. And this man saw what I could do, and he invited me to be privately tutored by him during the summer. And I stayed at Collège Saint-Jean. It's a college for boys in Edmonton. I stayed there and I had breakfast there and I slept there. But during the day I would go to Karl Aldenberg's residence, and there was one other student. There was two of us. And I learned what the Europeans' art was happening at that time. On Saturday, he would take me to the library at the university, and he would take out a bunch of books. And we would arrive there around 10 o'clock, and he would show up about 5 o'clock in the evening, you know, the afternoon. But I'm going through all these books that he piled up on me. And these are the words he said to me. He says, do not read, study the picture. So that's what I did. So I started looking at the pictures, and you know, if you really look at the composition, that composition sometimes goes out and comes back somewhere else, you know. So I started to see that, you know. And then at 6 or 5 o'clock, he'd come and pick me up. It would have oxtail soup. Germans love that, I guess. And I didn't like it at first. But after a while, you know, you get a taste for it, you know. And that black bread, you know. God. I didn't know how to eat black bread, but after a while you acquire a taste for it too. Anyway, then he would quiz me about what I had observed in those books. I'd even tell him the page and whereabouts and all that. And so my observation was pretty clear. So that was the beginning of my education, visually, you know. And from there on in, I actually went to high school, finished it, played sports, hockey, football, everything, you know. I was quite athletic as well. So when you're a farm kid, they can fit you into anything, you know, in college. I was a tough little boy, I guess. So I did all right. Then I applied to go to art school. This was a story in itself. I applied to London County Council in England, and I was accepted. And then I couldn't get a passport because I was an Indian. I came from an Indian reserve, and they wouldn't even give me the piece of paper to allow me to leave the country. And so that was out. So I applied to Art College of Ontario, and I was accepted one more time. And there, I was happy I was going to go somewhere, you know. And I found out, I went back to the Indian agent. You have to clear yourself out of these reserves through the Indian agent. It's got to give you a pass, you know, to get out. So you guys have to go on the other side of the river. You need some kind of identity to do that. Well, for us to leave the reserve, we had to do that, you know. And so I thought I was going to come to the great city of Toronto, you know. Art College of Ontario. I was accepted, and all I needed was the clearance from the Indian agent again. And this is what he told me. He said, I don't think you're smart enough. These people down east, they're brilliant, and I don't think you can fit in. You know? So, but I have you registered, he says, at an art school, and that was in Calgary, Southern Alberta Institute of Technology and Art. It was just a little place at that time, and that's where my art education became to be. But I found out I was smarter than even my professor, because I had the European education through the private tutoring. And I know that some of these professors were, you know, really keeping an eye on me, because I was coming with something fresh, something new. And so they would invite me for their dinner, you know. I didn't like their cooking, but I would go anyway. You know. When you're an art student, you can just about eat anything. Anyway, almost, and I had to answer the questions. It didn't go too well, but that's how it was. Anyway, I got graduated in 1960, and I was going to change the world, and I was gung-ho to do that. And I started in the art world, and I started painting. But I also started teaching at the University of Alberta. And for 2 years I did that. And then after 2 years, they asked me if I would join them. You know. I didn't know exactly what to do, but I said, okay, you know. When you're young and stupid, you do that, you know, you okay anything, you know. Anyway, 2 weeks later, I forgot all about it and said, well, what's your answer, you know? I said, well, I decided to go paint full-time. And I remember some of these professors, they were just red in the face, and they were mad, you know, that I would turn them down. You know? And one of them even got up and says, you're going to starve, you know, pointing at me. And of course, my only answer to that was quite simple. Not if a rabbit came along, I'll be all right. And I really got him mad, you know. So that was the end of my quest for the privilege to teach. And I've been painting full-time since. I became a famous artist, I guess. That's what they say I did anyway. And the truth is that I have my own gallery at home. I have a little card here if you want to pick one up. You know, my work can be seen there. And I've traveled on my own steam through the painting, the selling of paintings and so on. And they say I'm successful, but if you see my bank account, there isn't one yet. I'm still looking for it, you know. But, you know, any money I got, I didn't play with it. My wife makes sure that I didn't play with that money. You know. I don't know about you boys, you know, maybe you got better control on your account than I would. But she controls it, you know. She comes from a farm in Saskatchewan, so they know how to look after the pennies. So that's why I'm successfully, I look successful, you know. Even this coat here, she bought it for me, you know. So that's the way things go. I'm privileged to be here today and to give you a little side story on where we came from. I was invited to the group of 7 to be in Winnipeg in 1972 or something like that. And Daphne Ojik calls me up on the phone. So are you still painting? I said, yeah. Come over here. Come and visit us, you know. We're going to start. She didn't tell me what they're going to start. So I got on a plane, and in those days, if you have $50, you can go to Winnipeg and back to Edmonton all in one day. You know, today I don't think you can even buy enough gas to go to the next town, you know. But that was a start. And I saw a bunch of crazy Indians talking and big plans. And God, I was amazed, you know. I didn't know how to even fit in there, you know. So I'm sitting quietly, and finally they decided to form a group, you know. But the group couldn't even get along, you know. So another meeting was called, you know, till the next time. So that's how we became neutralized eventually in some of the other meetings. We stopped picking on each other tribally, you know, and it started to make sense. And we even had Bill Reid with us. And it was lucky we had Bill Reid, because to get the media address our group, we couldn't get even the newspaper to come and, write about us. And Bill Reid knew some people. He pulled the strings for us. Next thing you know, we're on the 2 papers in Winnipeg, the great city of Winnipeg. Had two tabloids that spoke about our little group to be, And so that was the marking of the beginning. And the Indian group of 7 is still we departed from each other about 74, and we started to go on our own. And every one of us succeeded, except Joe here is an American. He can't get it going in the United States, But he comes over on the Canadian side, and he feels good, But it's nice to be in a country where things can happen, You can even alter and change things around a bit, Today, we're respected now as artists, and my future is in the National Gallery in 2016, and probably around November or some date anyway, late. So I'm going to have my own personal show, Yeah. But Morrisseau and Daphne, they already exhibited there. So 3 out of 7 is not bad, Joe is the only one that's is left out. The other, so he's going to de-Americanize and come and join us, Anyway, I'm not here to tell all the story, so I'll stop here, and if you want to talk after, you can talk to me. I have some cards here about where I have my own card now, My wife allowed me to carry one of my cards. So I'm doing good. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I would just like to say, again, how interesting it is to have, I consider some of these folks like my master artists. When you speak of master artists in like the Western ideology sense, these are my masters. And I find it fascinating, being in 2015 now, where we have social media and digital arts and that nature, how we could pay homage today to these folks. And I think that will be a project that I'd like to invest some of my time in with Michelle, and get these folks some digital recognition, and I'd like to actually work towards promoting Alex's work. There's a lot to be said about how much time and effort goes into an artist's work, but yet they never get to see the compensation. So I think that's very important to support our forefathers. And thank you, Alex. Next, I'd like to introduce Raphaëlle to Groot. Again, I would just like to say how honored I am to meet you. This is the first time I actually met Raphaëlle, and your work is very inspirational. And I'd love to hear more about it. I know we didn't get this chance to speak, so I'm with the rest of you here in this one. So again, thank you.
Hello. You guys rock. Really. Maybe we can start the images.
Yes, sorry.
Hello, everyone.
Actually, if you go to slideshow,
You start a slideshow. Maybe by pressing here, actually. No, not PowerPoint.
just close this and go back and go to slide.
Oh, sorry.
It's gonna go on its own. Yeah. 390 grams. They will be a burden to whoever has to sort his stuff. 10 grams. Her ex-boyfriend's guitar string. She wants him out, she wants him out of her house, all of him. 33 grams. Without its mate, not much use. 353 grams. It seemed imbued with a kind of violent energy that didn't seem appropriate for the garbage. 166 grams. I brought a stuffed moose that snores when you press the hand. I brought it back from Victoria from an ex-boyfriend. The moose somewhat represents the first time I felt rejected and embarrassed by something I was initially excited about. It's a constant reminder every time I see it above my bed, and I need to let it go. It's bothered me for so long, and I really don't know why I didn't get rid of it sooner. A bedpan. Muriel saw a great garden in Phillinsburg, out where many bedpans were used as art objects. She wanted to do that in our garden. It never worked. So these are just a few sentences or stories, anecdotes that I collected alongside to this object collection. So practically all the items you see in the exhibition downstairs come with a story. I started this whole project in 2009 under the title of The Burden of Objects at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. I guess all my work in some way tries to shift our attention to areas of our life or human experience that we tend to not look at for some reason. And this project is a work site of this shifting of attention process. So I went on. So I was invited by the Southern Alberta Art Gallery to do a residency there for a period of about 4 months. And I decided I would start with collecting things. And so the collecting things, inviting people to donate items. So how I did that was by sending out a call through posters or the radio within also the university that I was attached to, and through the network of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. And basically what I was asking for is for ordinary objects that you have at home, things that you discarded from your life, your present life, but without really disposing actually of them, by storing them away, kind of out of sight. So I was interested through that in looking at a kind of limbo space of things, where things have a kind of undetermined faith or undecided faith. And gradually this space where things kind of fall into, we tend to forget that these things are there. And so that's how the whole Burden of Objects started. And eventually, gradually after that, I did many other object collections. So in Lethbridge was the first one. Then I went in Italy, did a second one in Quebec City, in Montreal, in Granby, the small town in province of Quebec, in Stansted and Derbyline, a kind of border town between the state of Quebec and Vermont, and also in Guadalajara in Mexico. All that over a periods of 3 to 4 years. So in a total, I have about 1,800 objects, and that is counting every single bead. So to the smallest, between the smallest and the biggest items. And I think that I haven't finished counting, but I probably these objects come from about 200, 250 different donors, so different people who participated to these this object collection. So it gives you an idea, a sense of the size of the process. So what do these objects are like? Because they could be. I mean, when you look at them, you're like, okay. So for the people who gave them to me, the kind of themes that come out are often gifts, for example, that you were given. You like the person, but you don't like the thing. Things, relationships, past relationships, things that belong to an ex, let's say. Things that are part of another part of your life, like childhood, your teenage years, or maybe when you work and now you're retired. Things that have to do with loss or mourning, so things that belong to a close person or even an animal. Then an area of stuff just that piles up, that's part of a kind of surplus of things that we kind of neglect actually to dispose of, and then that we just like brush under the carpet because maybe there's either a kind of sense of guilt or responsibility just about material things accumulating, or because there's a form of compulsion that we can't throw out because we think maybe that we're going to need the thing, need it at some point. Other objects, for example, are a project that was never accomplished. So things that you keep because you have an idea of restoring furniture, or but the project never happens, or a project of repairing something that never happens. Then what else? So things that might be useful. Things that have lost, you know, a pair of gloves, you lost one, you think you're going to find the other one, so you keep just in case, and then another area of things that you've kept for so long that maybe that if now you actually throw them out, it's going to be terrible. So a kind of superstition of some sort that keeps you from just letting go. So throughout this whole kind of investigation, while I collect things, I make inventories, photographical inventories. I weigh things. So the burden of objects in French was translated by le poids des objets. Le poids is the actual weight. So there's this idea of kind of putting together or next to each other the physical materiality and weight of things with their immaterial weight, value or meaning or signification. And what started to happen, maybe you saw kind of going that through the images, all that project was developed in relationship also to my own life that is happening in various countries and cities, mainly between Montreal and Italy, because part of my life is in Italy. My husband is Italian, my son was born there, and I've been traveling a lot between the two sites, and actually not having any material possessions, having my own stuff stored away, and often living in the stuff of others in by subletting an apartment when I'm in Montreal. And so all what you see here, the images, some of images, as so the objects travel with me, they accompany me. I carry them in many places and cities, and so like that, they have adventures. They come to life through these adventures. They get out. They actually literally get out. And there was one point where I came back from one of these travels, just simply wrapping up a bunch of objects that accompanied me in this red package that you see. in the exhibition and that you see in these photos. So all of these objects that traveled with me in many various landscapes, to the sea, to the river, to the mountain, doing walks with them, that then became wrapped again in this bundle that I chose never to open again. And from that point of these objects being inside that package, I decided to continue and extend the relationships objects could have between each other to relatives that maybe these objects inside the package could have in other types of collections that are not personal or individual, but that would be collective and institutional. And I went with the list of all that was in that red red package to the Musée de la Civilisation in Quebec City, that is a kind of ethnographical museum. And I started searching for equivalents. And this photo that you just saw are the objects that I found in the museum's collection that I associated with my own objects. And so from that point started a kind of web of relationships from the items of my collection to searching for relatives in these museological collections, and eventually also to collections but in various cities. And so gradually we are coming to now this exhibit that you're seeing, which is called the Summit Meetings. So what started to happen in this whole project at the beginning is that I was collecting things and I was placing things and manipulating things and carrying things. And then suddenly it wasn't anymore me that was moving the objects, but it was the objects that started moving me and making me do things. It started when I was traveling with the objects. I would go to specific locations with these objects as if they were companions. Let's say I had with me the bad news telephone that was given to me by someone who said he received the news of his mother's death through that phone, and then his father's death, and his last uncle, and his last aunt, and then his best friend. And so he said to me, I don't want that phone anymore, So now that phone was mine, and when I went traveling with the phone, then I started feeling, well, where would the phone want to go? And so I would be in Mexico, and I would be going to a cemetery with the phone, as if, that would be something the phone would enjoy to do. And discovered their tombs, for example, where many objects were left as a kind of, as gifts for the dead. Yes, so I was talking about this kind of shift of perspective where gradually I started to really see these objects in another way, as having a life of their own, and being containing a form of power. By that I mean that since they're making me do things, and they're actually making me look for new things in museological collections, or looking at these collections in a different way, and trying to search in these institutional collections things that would be corresponding to that could have conversations, or as I said, that would have like some form of affiliations with my own collection. So the various things that, of course, a bag. I have a bag. I search for a bag in museological collections, but then also the function and playing on the function of things, maybe in a more kind of something that would act as a link, for example. What is the function of the link? So that is open to interpretation. Of materials, relationships in materials, colors, shapes, but also in stories, objects that are ordinary, but that have in some way an extraordinary story or an uncommon story. And many other characteristics that are hard to find, like if my object is broken, or I have just a part of a thing, or a thing that I cannot even identify anymore. So that brought me to discover in various collections a category that I like a lot, which is the category of the non-identified things, objects that we don't know what they are, and that we don't know how to name them, but they are in collections. And so I started looking at the same kind of space that we have in our house, where things kind of fall in the crack and out of sight, but in these institutional collections, and also through the history and the lens of the various destinations that now I knew this last chapter of The Burden of Objects would be presented, which is the summit meetings that happen in Lethbridge, Alberta, and here now, and then in Quebec City at the Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec. And so started searching also for something that would be specific to these various locations and institutions. I think I've spoken enough.
Well, thank you very kindly. To you explain that, I thought it was very interesting and ironic that when I was talking earlier about the juxtaposition of the paintings and Raphaelle's work, how there was like a lot of commonalities between it with respect to collection and emotion and storytelling. But what I found after listening to her was, when you spoke of the burden of the weight, it's almost like the complete opposite of when you paint, when you create something, a creation as an artist will, when we actually like physically make something or express an emotion through painting, it's almost like that burden's released, but yet you took on the burden of the release of all those other folks and the weight from all those stories. So I'm wondering, and I know we're gonna have some Q&A after, but I was just wondering physically how, usually when we paint as artists and we make that spiritual connection, we're releasing that energy to free ourselves, but you've actually done the opposite. And I was just wondering physically, how are you? Because it seems like it's actually overwhelming, really, what you've collected in the stories and the angst that went with that collection. So I'm just curious as to how you're holding up, really. We can probably visit that later, but if that's something for us all maybe to think about, because I know we all collect things of our own nature, whether it's a drawing that we produced or an item that reminds us of something that we went through. So thank you. Okay, next we have Bob McKaskell, and another educator, I believe. So I will just give the floor to Bob, and we'll just keep moving along here.
I'm not a mathematician, but I understand that there's something called a surd that operates in mathematics. It's an element that has nothing to do with the equation at hand, but somehow operates there for no unknown reason, for no known reason. So I'm the surd on this panel. I didn't curate any of these shows. I didn't see them before last night. I just have a title, Storytelling in the Lives of Objects. So that's what I'll deal with. I have the first slide. Oh, the first slide, please.
It's the wood duck. It's the Duchamp.
You all know the image. There it is, a little corner of it. So, There was this Frenchman who moved to New York in 1915 to get away from the disaster of war in Europe. He was a painter and already had a reputation in New York because of a scandal that surrounded one of his paintings that had been shown there 2 years earlier, Nude Descending a Staircase number 2. In 1916, he, together with some other European expats and some progressive American artists, formed an association called the Society of Independent Artists. They held their first exhibition in April of the next year. The show was open to all members, but membership came at a price, a $1 initiation fee and an annual membership fee of $5. My computer tells me that 6 1917 US dollars is the equivalent of $2,535.42 in today's Canadian dollars. Initially, my mind rejected that. What artist today would pay $2,500 to be in a show? But then I remembered that a newspaper cost about a penny in 1917. A new Model T Ford, fresh off the line, cost something like $300, and leaping ahead by 30 years, my parents bought their first house in 1947 for $3,000. Clearly, the high entrance fee did not discourage many artists. That year, there were 2,125 works hung 3 deep on panels placed through a 10,000 square foot space. The rules for the society were simple and clear. No jury, no prizes. Any artist could show any work, and the works would be hung alphabetically through the space, beginning with a randomly selected letter. Actually, there should have been 2,126 works in the show. Our Frenchman, Marcel Duchamp, using a pseudonym R. Mutt, had submitted a sculpture titled Fountain. It was, in fact, a wall-hung urinal to be exhibited horizontally rather than vertically. As reported in Clark S. Marler's book on the Society, quote, Beatrice Wood reported the conversation she came upon between Rockwell Kent, who violently objected to the urinal being shown as indecent, and Walter Ahrensberg, who defended the right of the artist to exhibit anything he chose once his membership fee was paid. The executive committee stood around discussing the thorny problem. Nobody noticed William Glackens leave the group and quietly make his way to a corner where the disputed objet d'art sat on the floor beside a screen. He picked it up, held it over the screen, and dropped it. There was a crash. Everyone looked around, startled. "It broke," he exclaimed. That's from that book. On the contrary, in Duchamp's account, as told to Pierre Caban much later in 1967, after the exhibition, we found the fountain again behind a partition, and I retrieved it. Caban reminds Duchamp that Ahrensberg subsequently bought it, to which Duchamp replies, yes, and he lost it. A life-size replica has been made since then. The story of Fountain was reported in an impromptu magazine titled The Blind Man shortly after the opening of the exhibition. I'll read the article in its entirety. The Richard Mutt case. They say any artist paying $6 may exhibit. Mr. Richard Mutt sent in a fountain. Without discussion, this article disappeared and never was exhibited. What were the grounds for refusing Mr. Mutt's fountain? Some contended that it was immoral, vulgar. Others, It was plagiarism, a plain piece of plumbing. Now, Mr. Mutt's fountain is not immoral. That is absurd. No more than a bathtub is immoral. It's a fixture that you see every day in a plumber's show window. Whether Mr. Mutt, with his own hands, made the fountain or not has no importance. He chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, created a new thought for that object. As for plumbing, that is absurd. The only works of art American has given are her plumbing and her bridges. I give this well-known story because it is, it seems to me, the origin story for our topic of this afternoon. Sure, works of art have always told stories. But before the last century, their function was to retell, to reinforce, or occasionally to reinterpret stories already known within a given culture. That guy hanging on a cross had meaning to Christians, but not to cultures who had never encountered the story of Jesus Christ. To return to the title of today's panel, with a single stroke, the lowly urinal, and by extension all objects, were invested with the potential of having a new point of view, a new life. Could I have the next slide, please? I want to introduce one Canadian object to this discussion. That's it. Yep. In 1960, 3 artists in Regina, Ted Godwin, Ken Lockheed, and Ronald Bloor, collaborated to produce an exhibition by Ted Godwin, Head Door, Lockheed, Ron Bloor, for the Norman Mackenzie Art Gallery, of which Bloor was director. The exhibition consisted of 19 works made from objects taken from piles of junk from the provincial government garage and presented them with the best gallery display techniques of the time. The exhibition received a lot of coverage, both locally and nationally. One article in the Regina Leader Post began with quotes from the supposed public. "Fire the whole staff. We are being shortchanged. Clean out the modernist junk." Bloor justified the exhibition, saying the intention of the show is to be provocative and satirical. It was one way of making people comment on present-day society by the most immediate of all means, objects themselves. Lockheed, then director of the Regina College School of Art, said, "We are endeavoring to awaken the gallery goer. The results have been extraordinary. People are asking questions. And if this exhibition can create an air of question, it has succeeded. How many exhibitions today are successful in getting reactions?" The exhibition was so successful that it was held over and was, according to the Canadian edition of Time magazine, the best attended in the gallery's 7-year history. Russell Harper, curator of the National Gallery of Canada, claimed on the national CBC that it was the most sophisticated exhibition of its type in Canada. Nevertheless, at the end of the exhibition, the works were dismantled and returned to the government garage or discarded as garbage. With the exception of the 2 parts that comprised the idol, which Ken Lockheed capped. I borrowed the idol for an exhibition I curated for the Art Gallery of Windsor and Glenbow Museum. The exhibition was called Making It New, the Big 60 Show, and was held in 1999. I met Ken downtown in a shopping mall in Ottawa, where he passed the parts over to me in plastic grocery bags. I assembled them in my hotel room and lived with the idol for a few weeks. After that exhibition was over, they were returned to him. My goal was to add them to the collection of the Art Gallery of Windsor, but the administration of the gallery changed before I could act. Then Lockheed died. I have no idea what happened to the work. Perhaps it went out with the junk, lives, and deaths of objects. Srimoy invited me to speak on this panel specifically because of a particular aspect of my curatorial history. I've had the privilege of roaming through the collections of 4 galleries in Canada to find and develop exhibitions of anomalies, those bits of flotsam and jetsam that accumulate over time and seldom leave the vault. The first was for Gallery 111 of the University of Manitoba. I remember coming across an abstract painting that did not have any attribution, an anonymous, if competent, abstract painting, probably from the early 1960s. What value could that have, all abstract paintings being so tightly identified with their makers? But there were also various parts of a puppet theater that L.L. Fitzgerald had made for his children and that had never been shown, and cut up sections of a mural that he had painted and never completed. Later, I did an exhibition for the Confederation Art Center in Charlottetown that included a manuscript of Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables. Whatever was that doing in an art gallery? And banners designed by prominent Canadian artists for the 1967 World's Fair held in Montreal. And for the Mendel Art Gallery, I did a show called Superlatives that included the smallest and largest works in the collection, the thickest painting, the first and most recent acquisitions, the work that had received the most extensive restoration, and the work that most needed restoration, the most utilitarian Inuit sculpture, the work with the most impressive frame, the largest duck, and so on. Next slide, please. Then there was the anomaly show I did from the collection of the Art Gallery of Windsor. There's a story that John Cage told about a large loft in New York City. There were large windows, the walls were painted white, the floor was covered with sisal. The space was so wonderful, he said, an old shoe would be beautiful in there. That's the way it usually is in galleries. I would argue, however, that the old shoe would depend on its placement for its beauty to become apparent. A few notes in conclusion. Stories and objects depend on their context and on the predilections and backgrounds of those who perceive and receive them. For some people in 1917, the idea of a urinal could not be separated from its visceral link to disgusting human waste, while for others it was a gleaming opening to a new manner of human creative thought. For some in 1960, rusting mechanical parts were nothing more than industrial waste, while for others they provided insight into new ways of making a connection to prehistoric fantasies. My own briefly brought together notions of exhibitions on display, the exhibition on display, foreground the autonomy of the individual object. But it seems to me that Raphaëlle de Groot encourages the kind of narrative that can develop among wildly diverse objects. And that magnificent treaty robe by Bonnie Devine uses incongruent materials, techniques, and forms to tell quite a different kind of story. We are all of our time, and as always, our times, they are a-changing.
Wow, thank you, Bob. I think that probably helped a lot of us on a lot of levels kind of get a better understanding of objects in today and objects from the past that we considered archaeological objects, and maybe where some of these present-day commodity objects will stand in the future when we look back at our civilization. Thank you. Next we have Russell Nahdee, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Russell quite a while, working with him in the Native community here in Windsor, all through my undergrad up to my master's program. And Russell has been, without Russell in our community, a lot of the Native youth here wouldn't be where they are today, and I'd just like to welcome him, and thank you, Russell.
Thanks, Jessica. Actually, I have a little slide of PowerPoint. So, in 1970, I moved from my reserve from Walpole Island. I jumped on a Greyhound bus with my Indian suitcases, which are green garbage bags, and ended up living in with a really nice room and board with a very nice English family, British family, Mr. and Mrs. Evans, where I stayed for a few years there, and I ended up going to a high school in London, Ontario, called Sir Adam Beck. That school closed, and I finished my grade 12 at HB Bill in London, and I finished it in. I should grab one of these. Just in case. A lot of memories are coming back just based on this. I haven't thought of it in a long time. So I ended up going to an art school there at Sir Adam, or at HB Beale. It's probably one of the most well-known, or at least one of the most sophisticated high school art departments in all of Ontario, actually, at that time. I'm not sure what it is like now. But during my time there, I would often skip school, I have to say. And what I would do is I would, not being ever in a city before, I would sort of just wander around the city and just explore. And I would go into art galleries, and I would go into museums, and I'd go to all sorts of things like that, bookstores, and just explore. And I remember when I was in a record store and I saw an album cover. It was the album cover, Bruce Coburn's album cover, Dancing in the Dragon's Jaws. And it had Norval Morisot's painting on it. And I'd never seen anything like it. And that sort of, and I ended up actually getting Norval's, it was a coffee table book at that time, actually getting his book. And I probably looked at that book every day for the longest time. So needless to say, the artist at that time had a great impact on me. And like I said, I've never thought of this in quite such a long time. In fact, when I decided to go to university, it was one of my first thoughts was I'd go into visual arts, and thinking more practical, I ended up going to sociology and anthropology because I thought I'd probably get a better job that way. I don't know if I have regrets or not, but it certainly has been part of my life all this time. So in this, what I've done is sort of did a bit of a homage to this panel and to the artist, and certainly in my job, I've been able to really collect stories, especially from students. I work as a so-called cultural worker. I work at the University of Windsor, and I'm basically a student counselor, education counselor, and I get to hear their stories. They may not know it, but they may see me as they come in and see me once in a while. That's probably how they remember. But I hear their stories throughout that time. So it really is a privilege and an honor to do that.
It's not playing, so do I just want me to hit them as we go?
Yeah, please. Actually, there's a one before that. So, one of the things I have access to is that I have access to all kinds of information. Just being in the position I'm in, I get sent documents and emails and reports like every day, and so I have my own little collection going in my little corner of the world. And this one really was a book that was donated, and what I found really interesting about this page was it's a photograph of an early sunrise ceremony, a Blackfoot ceremony. And what you see on the top panel is you see a foot. You can see that foot sticking out. And what that is, that's the photographer, and he's sneaking a photo of the ceremony. And what happens in the next panel is you see the Scubeas come running at him, and you can see his shadow standing up. He's getting up as the Scubeas is coming at him, and he looks like he has, I don't know if it's an axe, but he has something in his hand. I don't know what the next frame would be. It would probably be the photographer running or someone chasing him. So, and it really is about even contemporary times. It really, for me, it is a story of how, and I really kind of learned this from when reading that book, Morris's coffee table book. And one of the things that he had, one of the challenges he had was in his artwork showing those images, because some of them were considered sacred and ceremonial. So this is the kind of idea here, is that this photographer was taking a picture of a sacred ceremony. And even today, it's really forbidden, and you don't have tape recorders, you don't have cameras, you don't have notebooks. You go and it really is the heart of our oral tradition that we're looking at, and it's something I thought I would bring today. The next panel is again, some of the things that and this is a report. I get a report. I think it was sent to me 2 weeks ago, and I just glanced at it and looked at it as a PDF, and I was drawn to the next page. If you want to look at the next page, yes. And what it is these are the rates of unavoidable deaths in our communities, which again are highlighted and looked at. You look at they're not very good. I'm not really tech savvy, so I just kind of cut and paste most of the time. So it really just is an example of the kind of information that I get surrounded by, and I look at and I try to read and I try to keep up with all this sort of thing. The next page is actually related to this. It's a book it's called Driving Lessons, and it's a book about the transportation industry and traffic safety. And it turns out to be more of how the author describes it is a dialectical, Hegelian dialectic on freedom, on the issues of freedom, and how we are really caught in sort of the web of the transportation industry and the auto industry and our own safety. And then if you go to the next slide, is one of the chapters out of that book. And what it is, and if you don't mind, I'll just kind of read it out to you from here. It says, on September the 3rd, 1999, near Windsor, Ontario, on the 401 highway that connects an endless stream of traffic with the American border, a thick early morning fog swiftly blanketed the unwary motorists. Some would say later that the heavy mist fell like a sheet around their windshields. Transport trucks and automobiles careened across the highway. Blinded drivers hit the brakes and steered to avoid obscured vehicles. On both sides of the road, ghostly cars and trucks piled into one another, as though in a giant deadly game of bumper cars. Twisted wrecks oozed gasoline. Stunned passengers debated in the gloom whether to stay put or risk fleeing into the maelstrom. And it goes on to in the rest of the chapters to really take a eyewitness account of that horrible day on the 401. That was about the same time that I actually moved back to Windsor as well. And the next screen is these these are some of the objects that ended up in my possession. And the top one is a dance stick, and it happened probably about 2005. I was in my office, and I got a visit from a firefighter, and a Windsor firefighter, and he had this baton in his hand, and he said, I'm trying to get this back to its original owners. And I said, oh, okay, well, tell me about it. Tell me more about it. And it turns out what this is in that chapter 9, if you could go back to a sec, Jess, the title of the chapter is Sugar Bear in the Hot Zone. And Sugar Bear is someone from my community. He's a well-known ceremonial, cultural advisor who lives there. He was known in his earlier days as a great fancy dancer and powwows. And what the firefighter told me was this was given to me by Sugar Bear, because Sugar Bear's mother was killed in that horrible accident, and he had made that baton and gave it to the firefighters for their efforts in saving people during that crash. Okay, thanks, Jess. Thanks. And the other object is another craft that was given to me one day by, I don't know if you can tell, but if you look right below it, there's a little pamphlet, and what it is the Gladue reports. And what the Gladue reports are, according to, in the justice system, Aboriginal offenders, once they're sentenced, they can ask for a Gladue writer to write on their behalf the extenuating circumstances why they were convicted, and it helps them to either reduce their sentences or give them other alternative means for sentencing, so sentencing circles and that sort of thing. And this object was given to me by a guy who would call me up like regularly, for years. He would call me, and a lot of times he was, I don't know, you couldn't understand him most of the time, if you know what I mean, right? And he would tell me about his story, and he would plead with me to help him, right? And certainly what he needed was a Gladue writer, right, for his case, and he never did get that. But he did actually end up coming to my office one day, and he gave me that object. So this is the kind of things that when Shmori told me about the exhibit and the nature of it, I was just like, I thought, wow, that's amazing. If you talk to my wife, I got all kinds of crazy things that I've collected over the years, like you name it. I have a collection of Kiss Pez dispensers, for example, right? Just strange things, and I hide them on her most of the time because I don't know where they'll end up. So, but this is what sort of inspired me. So this is my homage to our panel and to our artists. Miigwech.
Well, folks, as you can see, this is highly emotional for a lot of us. There's so much emotion deeply rooted in our stories, and there's a lot of history and a lot of pain, and thank you for bearing with us and sharing with us, and thank you, Shmori, for the opportunity to bring us all together. I've learned so much just from sitting here today and listening, and thank you so much. And last but not least, we have Joseph Sanchez, and I had the privilege of speaking with these gentlemen last night, and just amazing folks, and I learned so much in the last 2 days. I'm just beside myself, but he shared with me some amazing stories, and I'll let him share them with you as well, but and they will help tie in together, things that Raphaëlle has said, and Russell, and Bob, and Alex, and it's just amazing how all of these elements play on each other. And there's so much more to this, like we haven't hit the nitty-gritty reasons of why we do the things that we do, and the oppression, and the things that really push us to go on and tell our stories, and to fight for our culture, and to be able to express our culture. So I think this is an amazing day for all of us, and to sum it up, I would just like to say, there's a deep, Joseph has a really interesting anthropological story about objects that he shared with me, and it has a lot to say about, you know, the power that we give an object, really, and I think that's just fascinating. So I will turn that over to Joseph. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'll start with talking about the storytelling element and what my work is, especially the work that's in this show, because there's specific, like Alex, I too was a young Catholic boy who went to seminary, basically gave up my childhood, and so the paintings you see in this show, those drawings, are a relationship to that. The one that's called The Unconsummated Rape of Mongo would be a piece that deals a lot with the apocalypse and the beast and the Whore of Babylon. And so my work relates a lot to women's issues in reality. And the one that's right next to it is called Businessman's Lunch, which is about the exploitation of women. And so it's always been a part of my the stories that are in my own work. Because in Winnipeg in 1972, when I did that, it was total nude dancing in the bars. And I'd never seen that before. And that kind of exploitation of women continues and has, you know, it's really evident in when you think about the 1,600 missing women, that it's not, that part hasn't gone away. And my story continued, like I've been hit by lightning 3 times. So there's another piece that you'll see in there called Night of the Moonmobile, a drawing. And I did this right after I was hit by lightning the 2nd time. And so I tried to illustrate what it was I was seeing, feeling for the whole from sunset to sunrise of being struck by lightning continually. I was inside a vehicle, but I could touch you and make your hair stand up for weeks afterwards. And then I was struck one more time in Regina. So I have this, so that you see that picture of the unconsummated rape of Mongo, and it was about this calling down lightning, which is part of that, of the apocalypse. So that, I didn't stay very long. I stayed a lot less than Alex stayed, because when I went to that seminary, they told me I was a dumb Indian. I'd start school over. And I said, nope, I'm not. I said, give me back my money, and I walked right out of there. 7 days, it was, and I'd given up, well, my whole high school, all my high school years, to studying for the priesthood, getting ready to go to the seminary. So that early work and that, just to give you some background on that early work that continues today, because I still paint. Today I call my work Mother Earth landscapes, but they're still filled with, oh yeah, well, there you go. That was one called, that's my wife's family, kind of a portrait of my wife, first wife's family. But I continue to do work that deals with the disrespect of women. And by that I also mean the disrespect of our mother, the earth. So I always continue, I'm doing really long narrative pieces. So like storytelling, I'm doing these drawings that are 43 inches by 90 feet, or 11 inches by 40 feet. And it's just, they're kind of like diaries. But when they talked about this panel, I thought about it, and when I went back to the States, got repatriated and went back to the States in 1975, I'd been hanging out with these guys and was, you know, at the top of my game. I thought, wow, fame, fortune. And down there, boy, the door was just slammed in my face. Nobody wanted my work. No one would understand. They thought it was too sexual. They certainly didn't want any of the politics involved with it. So I became a museum person. I started as a security guard and went on to become a museum director. But during that process, one of the events, considering the life of objects always concern me, especially the objects that are from native cultures. While I was at the Phoenix Art Museum, they had the show called the Cowboy Artists of America, and these were guys who painted basically native history, the holding the McKaskell horses, the raiding party, Apache warring party, all that kind of stuff. But these guys were also supporting grave diggers, and they would dig up these objects and paint them, stage them. And at that time they didn't think I was native, so they could say anything in front of me. And there was one painting in particular that really disturbed me, which was a painting of a cradle board and a pair of moccasins. And it was from a grave. And this guy was so proud that he had paid this man to dig up this grave and take these objects, which then he painted them, and the painting was then sold at the Phoenix Art Museum. And so there was quite a few of these stories that were all these objects. And at that time, in the early 80s, there was a lot of, throughout the Southwest, a lot of grave digging. And these objects would appear, and lots of people made lots of money, and no one was arrested. Only later on did that ever change. But they felt that, like native objects, we can do anything with them. They have no history. They're our history. We can paint them the way we want them. We're always relegated to the museum. In a place like Flagstaff, Arizona, there's the room in the back of the museum is filled with, it's one big as one of the galleries here, boxes of bones. So what are those objects? Those are our ancestors, our people. And there is a history and a story there that we'll never know about, because they're just jumped together. Mixed people. It's just bones upon bones. And it's very spooky to be in there. Also in this life as a museum person, I've also had to come into houses where a collector had purchased a bunch of Hopi prayer altars. He's not supposed to have those. No one's even supposed to see them. And he started getting sick. Things are very happening to him. So they called me in, and I went in there and removed the objects, packed them up, and he gave them back to the Hopi. So my experience in the museum world has been looking at the way they treat objects of Native America different than they teach other objects of people. They have this ownership, and this is my object. And these objects really aren't their objects. But have been sold, the selling of native culture has been really big business and continues to be. So when I think of objects, I always look at that. The story she was talking about was this object. I did a show that was called Man's Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And I'd always been fascinated with the crystal skull that was here in Ontario. And it was a whole year of preparation for the show, which involved astronauts in Hollywood and especially the UFO community, which was really, that's why I got chosen, because at least I would listen to them. It was pretty absurd stuff, all the abductions. But the skull, we got this call right before the show opened. It said, "The skull wants to be a part of your exhibition." I said, "Really?" I couldn't believe it. I tried early on to go see this skull. It's a human-sized skull of rock crystal with a free jaw, has 34 teeth, so they say it's a woman's skull, and a very powerful object, just beautiful. So the skull came, and all she needed was a place to sleep, and she didn't want no plexiglass boxes, because the skull, if you put it in a plexiglass box, the plastic breaks. So what she told me was that the skull wanted to meet people again. It hadn't been touched by people, because she found it when she was 17 in Belize, Honduras. And her father was Mitchell Hedges, an anthropologist, and she was 17 on her 17th birthday. Well, that's the story anyway that they stuck to, and she saw a shiny object, and it was the skull. And 3 months later, they found the free jaw. So it came, and 10,000 people touched it. When it came, it was very cloudy, and it became very clear. And people brought all their crystals, all their objects, and put it next to it, and it purified lots of stuff. You know, I witnessed, I became the guard for it. I'd stand next to it, and you know, electricity would fly from hands from some people to the skull. You know, it was pretty amazing. And she had been carrying it since she was 17. This lady now was in her late 80s, wrapped in towels in this little leather bag. And so I told her, well, I'll make you a way to carry it so the jaw won't get broken. And so I had to handle the skull and stick my fingers in the eyes and stuff as I made a beautiful foam cutout to carry this object. And it made me think about it, because I had to look at it really close, and the history behind who had this. Because when she said she found it, the people, the tribal people of that area said, it's now yours. You take it. It chose you. So because she wanted to give it back to them, they didn't want it anymore. Because it chose her. So this skull affected then the astronauts. All the Apollo astronauts were a part of this exhibition. And so twice again the skull came to Scottsdale with all the astronauts, and they did these private meditations with it. So which I found really interesting, because all those astronauts had some sort of spiritual experience by being in outer space. Whether it was UFO, they saw people chasing them, you know, they saw all these things. And the final time I made this little box, with a little LED in a pinhole, and the skull projected the Earth on the ceiling of this room for the astronauts. And they were, whoa, you know, but it was prismed on the roof of the mouth. It had cone-shaped eyes, so if you put any light on it, it projected. It was very amazing. So at the end of all this, the astronauts all come out, and the skull says, he wants to talk to you. I said, oh no. So I went in there by myself and sat with the skull, and it was, this power of this object was as if I went through the river of history and saw everything happening. And then I was spit out and I couldn't breathe. I was gasping for breath. And it made me think, wow. It says, and this message was to me, this is not something to toy with. You know, show some respect. And so with that, I've always had lots of respect for any kind of object that has that spiritual connection. You know, and hence I was always called in to remove objects that people shouldn't have. But in Native America, there's so many of our objects people shouldn't have. They're in museums or in cases. So that's, you know, I think that puts the Native people in a place. It's different than other objects in the whole world. Why they treat us, this culture, as something that can be collected like that and put on shelves. And, you know, it's the other object that's like that is the skull of Geronimo that's reported to be in the hands of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale. And my good friend, he's related to the Geronimo lineage. And they've tried to get it back. They deny that it exists there, but people have seen it. And they wanted to dig Geronimo back up to prove the fact that he has no head, because they wanted to rebury him back in Arizona, where he was from. So the lives of objects are very interesting and I think different to Native people. And our stories then are taken, anthropologists, archaeologists have taken our stories and created their own mythology. So it's only until recent times have we got to say our stories are our own stories. Not the story you made up about it, but there is a different story. And it's because all the writings on the native worlds are done by non-natives. It's only recent times that we're kind of breaking free of that. And it was this group that really inspired me to continue doing that, to speak out across all kinds of barriers and go to Washington, talk about that stuff, talk about artists' rights, native artists' rights. What is, we're not cultural artifacts. We can't be collected. So it's, and that kind of seeps into my own work, even though it's not so literal. Because I still only think about the planet. So my work is basically a narrative about trying to save our planet, trying to save our water. The most recent work that I'm doing is about the water. We give up water so easily, give it up for oil. But will we be able to live? We can't drink oil. So the stories that we tell, I think, and young artists today are starting to really bring that forward. So I'd like to see that and encourage it, that they need to not necessarily be more aggressive, but they need to really point out the facts that the things that we're doing to this planet are affecting all of us. So we're really we are a throwaway culture right now. That's why all the objects are left over. Everybody has so much stuff, and we really don't need that stuff. Not anymore. We can't. There's no more minerals to mine up. We just keep destroying our environment, trying to make more stuff. So it's time we left the stuff back in the earth. Down south, they're trying to dig the world's largest copper mine on Apache territory, a 12-mile wide hole. And it's being done. It was sold by Arizona's senators to Brazil, a Brazilian company. So the native people are camped out there. Hopefully they haven't sent in the troops to haul them out like OPEC, but it's a possibility. But I'm still concerned about all the objects that remain in the different museums all across the country. A lot of it has not been repatriated. They won't give it back to Native people because a lot of them want to rebury the objects, re-put them back to where they were. Right where I grew up, there's these beautiful Apache paintings on, and they're shaman paintings. They're stories, which they were in a cave, and they're in Chicago at the Museum of Natural History, and they won't give them back. It's not their history. Somebody that came through Arizona found them digging through the caves and took them. But I find it amazing that they can take our bones and keep them like that, and also not identify them. So recently they just built a new community center in Santa Fe, and there was all this speculation that there was never a civilization there. And when they started to dig the hole for the big convention center, they found thousands of people. So all these bones were then put into this building downtown, and I'm not sure where they went from there, but the building flooded then, and all the boxes got wet, and so all the bones got mixed. So it continues, and that's very recent. So when I think of objects in Native America, well, I think there's a special designation because they've showed little respect for these objects, or for truly our own remains. Outside of that, I hope my story gets more positive. But I think when you're an artist and you want to tell stories, the story of water is not a pretty one, but it's so beautiful. I look out and I say, wow, we do have this blue planet filled with water, but we keep turning it down there. It was just a big spill. The river ran yellow for 2 weeks when the big oil spill on the Animas River in New Mexico. And it flowed right through the reservation. So they didn't tell anybody. It's just going through the reservation. And so, of course, the sheep died, and he said, well, the water's good to drink, it's clear now. But now they're finding all the residue and more dead animals. So it's still, Canada, I love Canada for the fact that it shows a lot more respect for Native people than they do in the United States. Because it's down there, there's completely, there's tremendous disrespect for Native people. And a type of racism that continues, especially in a state somewhere like Arizona, where the whole state, except for the major cities, is Indian reservation. Yet they have they can't vote anybody in. The whole system's been corrupted by the government. So our own people have been co-opted. And so it's a Republican state. That's about it, I guess.
Thank you, Joseph.
Can't stress enough, honestly, how important, a lot of the content and meaning behind a lot of First Nations artwork is, primarily about the oppression and the pervasive attitudes that work against us. And there's a lot to be said about that. Think about why the government oppressed Native philosophy and Indigenous knowledge. There's reasons for that. What are we fighting against? We're fighting against, fracking and all of those things, and oil, and the pollution in our water and so forth. So you have to realize, why are they oppressing us? Because we're the voice for Mother Earth, right? So I think there's a lot to be said about that. And now I'd like to open up for a little question answer. I know we kind of went over a little in our time, but I thought it was very important to let each panelist speak, as it's very informative and very, very educational. I thank you all, and I think we'll all walk away from here today a little better, I hope. Does anybody have any questions? Maybe I can kind of get us talking a little amongst us here. So, Raphaëlle, have you had the opportunity ever to meet any of our other panelists or see any of the artwork before?
It's my first time discovering to that extent and being in front of these paintings in life.
So, from when I was asking you, when I was asking you earlier about, how you were talking about the burden of the objects that they place on you, and after listening to everybody's input on objects and Joseph's and the power, can you share with us how that was saying how that has taken a physical effect on you in your collection?
Well, for sure, a lot of what I'm doing with this project is we each have in our houses an area where we accumulate things. And by taking all these things through the will of people who want to donate them to me and participate to this initiative, I become a kind of accumulator that reveals this accumulation. And I guess that through my figure, my body, in other works that I've done throughout the burden of objects, that I wore the objects on myself, carry them physically, wore them on my head as a mask, or simply trying to balance things on my head. And so I guess I tried to convey some kind of maybe a kind of identity or an image of this accumulation, but through an accumulation that then would be one person kind of incarnating that that burden. And that now with this the summit meetings, it's like if I'm trying to make a bridge or draw a bridge between this idea of individual burden and a collective one, and through working with institutions such as the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, the Art Gallery of Windsor, and the Musée National des Beaux-Arts du Québec, it's kind of asking, is there a relais? No, not a relation. You know, like the sport, like when they run and then it's your turn. A relay, yeah, a relay from my own gathering of things to then the institution, and so now I feel the weight has been shared. Again, mainly through a dialogue with curators, and through not only curators but also preparators. So these people who work in museum and dedicate, well, as Joseph has experience with objects, handling them within museums, and being kind of gatekeepers or doorkeepers of these spaces where objects are kept. And so I don't know how to really answer this question of the physicality of if it has I'm tired.
Well, as Joseph was saying, he could almost feel the energy from these objects. Have you specifically felt like?
Well, yes, I do.
Story,
yeah, but I do feel a responsibility, commitment, which is kind of absurd in a way. But I for me, it has become very real. This commitment to these objects, and overwhelming, because when even talking to you today, I was so nervous because I'm just seeing all that I cannot be saying about all of these things in that short lapse of time. And it's problematic for me because there's no one item that should be put forward. There's no king or queen of the objects. It's like, for me, I'm responsible for every single one, even though maybe some are insignificant. There's nothing is insignificant anymore, and so that is haunting. The kind of. And also, for example, here displaying all these things, but purposefully choosing to not give access to single stories. In that exhibition, you cannot, it's not, you have the phone and then you have the story of the phone, and it would be it would be overwhelming for the public. They wouldn't be able to take in the amount of information that there is in that exhibition, the stories behind, and also not just the stories, but the relationship between all of this web that you can start weaving between all the stories, but not just the stories, so the people, because stories it's the people who make them in a way. Anyway, so yeah, there's this, and for me, it's not finished. I mean, this whole summit meetings is trying to find a closure and asking the question, so I took on this burden, and so there was a kind of a leg, they donated these objects to me, and I'm the guardian, and now what should be their future, and I would like them to answer for themselves, it's a kind of play. Of course, it's always, I'm projecting, but I'm wrapped in this, pushing this idea of trying as much as possible to ask what would they want for their own future, and I think they want to free themselves from our pulsion of or compulsion for representation, and so I'm not sure what that means, and how that can be materialized or concretized. I don't know. So I don't know if that answers a bit some questions.
Wonderful, thank you. And I was just that kind of goes with Russell. You've been collecting bits of, I would say, memorabilia, right? Like that actually were bookmarkers of very influential and powerful memories that were obviously really hit home and were something that you wanted to hold on to for another day and to share that story at some point. And I find what's really fascinating is with all of, can you share with us a little like how, I'm sure everybody's seen how incredibly emotional we all are about all of this and how much emotion and passion and love really goes into all of this, and how we truly individually feel about collections and objects. And I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more of your experiences with Alex and Joseph with us. That would be great. Yes.
Oh, it's been really a formative experience for me as a young curator, sort of young. I still think I'm a curator. You know, what a privilege to work with, you know, I do this a lot, so, you know, to meet 4 of these 7 artists, you know, like Russell was saying, as a young artist, young female Indigenous artist, not able to see herself represented in the education system. When I would come across things like this, I would spend a lot of time you spend a lot of time looking at these images, artworks, artists who are underappreciated, not recognized, not presented in the education system. I'm positive there's been some changes since I was in school, but it wasn't that long ago I was in school. And the only kind of Indigenous art history I was taught about actually was Emily Carr, who we all know is not an Indigenous artist, but that was wrong. So then I had to find my own way to gain access to these artists and learn about, like relearn kind of a history of Canadian art. So I'm really happy that you know, things have changed. There's still a lot of change that needs to happen, but you know, then to, you know, as a young emerging curator, just the, you know, being able to sit down like a fly on the wall with you know, I was able to get some funding to bring Alex and Joseph, and we spent a few days with Daphne out in BC, and like, you know, awesome. So yeah, this is how I feel. It just really has been yeah, like life-changing, and for myself and others, I think it has you know, created this resurgence. You know, this is not, definitely, I don't like to think of it as my show by any means. I'm literally here because of the work that these artists and other artists at that time, because of what they did. They fought for opportunities in Canadian art institutions for Indigenous curators who could speak to you know, the exhibition, display, and discussion and interpretation of Indigenous stories and objects a little bit more responsibly and with a little bit more care, with a little bit more knowledge of protocols. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Glad to have you.
And I think it's important to point out, you know, unfortunately, why I say there's still a lot that needs to change is there's only 3 of us, now 4 I believe, Indigenous curators hired in full-time positions in mainstream institutions in Canada, and I'm part of a community of artists and curators, and we're all pretty educated, so it's not like we don't have the expertise, but there still isn't positions. So I think from the, you know, I think probably Robert Houle, Tom Hill, Leanne Martin, some of the early curatorial trailblazers, that was only in the 90s that they were gaining access into these institutions, and the battles that they had to face so that people like myself could then create these large nationally touring shows. At the time, that wasn't, it was a harder battle to fight. But the fact that it hasn't changed, there's still only 3 or 4 of us in institutions across Canada, I think is pretty embarrassing. So yeah, I think there's a lot that needs to change, and there's definitely a lot more senior people than myself, and there's a lot of upcoming young, very keen curators who had the opportunity through their education and experience to learn a lot more than what I have. So I'm looking forward to the future. I think there's going to be a lot of positive things coming.
Thank you, Michelle. And just one more thing, while we have everyone here together on the panel, I know we're kind of running out of time here, would any of the panelists, since you might not have the opportunity ever to maybe cross paths again, is there anything that you would like to ask each other? Did you learn anything from listening to each other today that maybe you would have considered or thought of with respect to your own work? If anybody wants to take a stab at that one.
I would just say that it these 2 shows reveal the necessity that the contemporary culture really kind of reflects. It's nice to see it both reflecting from earlier work that's in a more traditional art sense, paintings, as opposed to an installation. Helps give you an idea of how things really work in the real world. And how we all have all these objects, we have all these collections, and we've become a materialistic culture. And what do we do with it all? And so there's garages. It spawns all these shows that have storage lockers where people bid on them and all that kind of stuff. We've created this tremendous amount of stuff. And what do we do with it? It's people's lives. Thank God it's not all bones. A lot of it's plastic now. But in our case, it was bones and our moccasins off our feet, literally. Which is it's been good. It's a good juxtaposition of information. And I think that helps raise our kind of awareness.
Well said. Thank you. Audience, would you like to?
I just had one question, or actually maybe a 2-parter.
Sure.
You guys
Would
can
you like
answer.
Just, I'm wondering what was Jackson Beardy like? As kind of a one part, and then the other part, who was the biggest troublemaker out of the 8 or 7?
Loved to chase a woman like her and all that. Jackson loved to chase a woman like her and like her. And this boy here would take one or the other, or both, So there was a big fight between them. It was just an interesting sideline, to watch them. But the main thing is that we were telling a story of everybody, tribally, and also Canada. And at that time, Canada was way behind. They were good in following hockey, but they weren't very good in following what was going on in the native world. And so I think our art helped to open doors for other Canadians to begin to see. Not only just to look at it, but to intellectually harmonize with some of our thinkers, And, so we begin to understand the other side too, the Canadian side, the children of immigrants, They were also departed from their own culture in Europe or wherever they came from. They were struggling to under this new way of surviving, and culturally developing a new culture. And I think they call it Canadian culture now, but it took a long time. A lot of people in the backgrounds that helped to create that. And I believe now we're in a position to really look at Canada as really Canadian Canada, and stop, splitting a nation by French and English, Because by the time we're through with those two sides, we'll outnumber them anyway, Even though our size may not change, but the population is gradually and quickly changing. And I'm really, as a painter, I've always stood between those two, because I have a French name and they don't even like me in Quebec. And then I speak English, and they don't think I'm an English character either. So I'm Denny, and that's the most important thing to me and my children and my tribe. I've reconnected with my tribe. I live on an Indian reserve now, and I live quite successfully. Been lucky to regenerate myself back to the cultural ways. I still speak my language, and when the four of us, or three of us now, get together, we speak our own language. And it's a good one. It's a language that talks about Canada. It fits in. About the lakes, about hunting, about gathering, about relationship, about how our connections of different lineages, we used to have beaver, bear, all that kind of eagle. We've lost all that because they said the Christian culture got us to get away from that. But some of it didn't die out. Some of it went underground, now it's coming back out. So, and that also includes the language. And the language is really about, it's the landlord's talk about the land and the where we live. And it also talks about, the weather, about everything about where we live. And that is how we relate to the animals and the fish, where we get our food supply from. We still can eat fish pretty good. I can eat a fish without even swallowing a bone now, because I had a lot of practice. There was one guy, he was famous for eating fish. He'd put the fish in here, and then the bones would come out this side. I'm not that good.
Hello, Jackson. Jackson in the group was the guy who was always going to the press. He always had a meeting to go to, so he was our spokes guy. He was, at least he believed that in himself, that he always had a briefcase, and there's an image of him was he's half in his traditional dance garb and the other half in a business suit. I think that pretty much sums him up. He was a sharp dresser and quite a talker. And it's totally untrue what he said about me, because I was married. I was very, I've been faithful to a fault, as I should say. But no, it was, to be a young man with that group was just amazing, because I was only 22 years old. And only later that I realized that these guys were older than me. and Daphne 30 years older than me. So it was like a blessing, you know. I've wandered up from the States, and wow, I'm running with these guys, and listening to stories that I thought I'd never hear. Even in the 70s, I used to go across the borders without any problem. And now, you know, of course, America's building the fence to keep those brown people from coming up north, and one of the presidential candidates wants to build well, he got out of the race, but he wanted to build a fence across Canada's border. It's just unbelievable. You know, this is not the time that we should be separate. This is the time we should be together. So, and I think this group kind of did that. It kind of made people aware of the diversity of native world. You know, there's all kinds of stories and lots of different languages and a lot of different thoughts. And how we stayed together was amazing, because we all came from different points of view, but we were held together by Daphne, really. All credit should go to her for being kind of keeping control of 6 crazy guys and not being overwhelmed. So I wish she was here. I wish we could talk to her on Skype, but she's doing good and drawing every day. So at 96, she's still a total inspiration.
She might outlast us.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph and Alex and Michelle. Would anybody else like to?
Trickster. Would anybody else like to share anything with us? Or can I ask our audience here, or anybody here, collectors of any sort, that'd like to share with us maybe? Get a little feedback from some of our expert panelists? Raise your hand if you collect any objects. Probably all of you, right? Wonderful. Did we learn anything today about ourselves, or maybe our fellow Native Americans or whatnot? Yes, wonderful. Well, I hope you all leave here today with a little something extra special. I know I have. Thank you, Shmuree. Anybody else like to add anything before we wrap up? We kind of went over our time a little bit, but I hope you don't have anywhere to go. We might be on Indian time, I'm not sure. Just kidding. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate it, and so honored again to be here with you all today. Thank you.